Here we are, Play It Forward, Matt Wyatt, filmmaker, writer, director, on the Tips and Tricks edition. Thanks for being here, Matt.
Absolutely. Happy to do
Matt, jumping right into it, pre-production, what do we do?
it. Oh man. Yeah, I'm a big nerd with like documents and spreadsheets for
Cool.
pre-production because I think the thing is like pre-production for me, like an enormous amount of the battle is won in pre-production because filmmaking is so chaotic and you want that, you want the ability to on the day be as focused as possible and not have like if I'm on set and then there's all these X factors, like I already know there's going to be a ton of X factors, but then if there's other X factors that are complicating that, it's just going to be such a nightmare to be creative, right? So for me, like the more work that I can do to get things as buttoned up as possible, knowing that there will always be chaos, like, but we can at least mitigate some of that chaos, which for me means, like having a whole bunch of documents of like shot lists and having as many conversations as I can ahead of times and having like contingency plans and stuff so that when there is chaos, like I was on a commercial the other day and like we did a fantastic job of getting it like as prepped as we could, knowing that there was going to be like an hour and a half in there where it was going to be absolute chaos. And it was even worse chaos than we had ever imagined. And so, like, the plan that we had developed ahead of time, like, that was the only thing that kept us from, like, things completely going off the rails. So, like, I lean big time on, like, being sort of like hyper organized ahead of time because I'm also a person where like I'll forget shit if I don't write it down and like especially like shot listing and stuff because it's so easy in the moment to be like okay great we got everything right and then you wrap and you're like oh no that one we needed that one shot and the last place you want to be is in an edit with an editor staring at you saying hey where's the key shot here and you realize you didn't have it so yeah like as much organization and probably and some people I'm sure would consider it overkill. I love like really loading up on that.
I haven't heard to spoken to a filmmaker yet who said you can overkill it on the pre side. And
Yeah.
what I love that you said is, and I want to dig a little deeper into like the actual techniques that you do. But you said you want to plan as much as you can, and I think it's so important that you said to be creative on set. Like that's the
Yeah.
point, so you can get
Yeah.
free to perform on that creative level. That is so, in the moment.
Totally.
Yeah.
Which is, a lot of times really what that pre-production process I think for me is too is kind of going over it so much that I've really internalized it. So then on the day, there's a lot of times where I have all these shot lists and documents and stuff, but it's so in my head that when you get to the rhythms of a set, then I kind of have an idea, even if it's different than what I imagined. I'm still able to make like I directed a music video recently, and we had a like pretty short window of time to shoot it all because we wanted it all to kind of be magic hour. So we're chasing the light a little bit, and I knew it was going to be tight and it was and we had a pretty good plan but as frequently happens the first few shots took a little bit longer and so then it was kind of just a race to the end of making sure we had the elements that we need but because I had spent so much time in pre-production internalizing that I had that kind of map game plan in my head to get what we needed through that time. So yeah, to your point, I think it's the preparation because yeah, I think when some people are starting out, like they worry that oh, it's too much. I'm boxing myself in. Like I want to be free, and it's for me, it's absolutely that gives you the freedom to then pivot and be creative and seize opportunities in the moment, because that's a lot of, that style of filmmaking too, is being flexible enough to see something amazing happen in the moment
Yeah.
and capture it.
Yeah. What, so you said like contingency planning. What type of contingencies are you planning around?
Yeah,
Like what
yeah,
happens if,
for me, it usually comes down to, I'll go into a shoot with a shot list that's probably way longer than what we're gonna actually achieve,
I
and
see.
then that shot list is enumerated by what are the nice to haves, what are the fun if we have time, and then what are the
I
absolute, we
see.
must have some
Yeah,
version of
I see.
this to tell the story. I think that for me is a big part of it, is that if all else fails, we know that we must have,
That's
these five
cool.
shots, that
So
type
you
of thing.
prioritize your shot list in terms
Yeah.
of you know, importance. Yeah.
Yeah,
From
exactly.
necessary
Yeah,
to nice to have. Yeah, that's
totally.
cool.
Yeah.
Cool. That's awesome. Like what happened when you were on set and the shit hit the fan just recently and you guys, what were the details of that?
It was, I kind of can't go into like too many specifics, but it was basically, it was a situation where we had a crazy short amount of time, and then because it was a commercial, as often happens, there's a lot of parties involved and everyone kind of wanted different things, and we realized that people wanted even more things than had been discussed. And so, that was a situation, and I think this is a great example of, it was a situation where the sort of core team of us really just had to unify in that moment, and everybody's egos went out the window, and it was just everyone on board to do what they could to help, which is another thing. I think I love working with people that I know I can trust and we're on the same page, so that, if we get into a situation like that, I know that the producer's head is in the same spot as mine, and I can say, hey, can you deal with this thing? Or I can say to a DP, there's a moment on this set where I was engaged with the client in a kind of like serious conversation about something, but we still had certain shots we needed to pick off. And so I was able to say to the DP, hey, we've talked about this. You know what I want. Can you just start ticking off some of these smaller insert shots while we're having this conversation? So I think that's another thing that goes back to pre-pro, of really making sure that everyone is on the same page for what we're trying to achieve,
By
so
taking
that
off, do you mean by taking off the shot list?
yeah, exactly. Just kind of like going through the shot list and grabbing these insert shots that he knew what the vision was. We had it set up. He could just go.
Oh,
And
I see.
obviously, he was a
Okay,
great, he was
I
a
see.
great DP. Like, I trusted his eye for that stuff. So that type of thing happens.
Yeah, yeah, cool. Well, I think, that's a great segue to, okay, we're on set, production process. One of the things that you mentioned that it's so, so critical. And I know when I was more younger than I am now as a filmmaker, I was so eager just to get work and to get experience. And I was like, okay, this guy knows how to use a red. Okay, we're gonna do this. We're gonna work with him, and this guy, and I can plug. Oh, let's just do it. And then you get into it, and you're like,
Yeah,
okay, we don't see eye to eye on anything.
right.
And
Yeah.
oops, like I was a little over eager. What do I do?
Uh-huh.
So I think, how have you encountered that kind of thing in the moment, and how have you built up a network of peers that you see eye to eye with and can trust?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because sometimes I'm working with people that I've known for years, and we have a shorthand, and we kind of, we see things similarly. Sometimes I'm working with people I've never worked with before. Literally, the last two projects I did, I was working with DPs who I'd never shot with before. Now, they were DPs who, I'd looked at a lot of their work, and we'd had conversations about things. But I think in that case, it's like, you want, at a base level, I think it's like you want people, if it's someone you've never worked with before, like you want to have conversations ahead of time to see if like you are on the same page creatively, but also to just kind of assess the best you can that you're the dynamic of your working relationship. Like if you're able to have conversations that are sort of collaborative and back and forth, which is not to say the other side of that coin is you also, I don't want someone who's just going to kind of not bring an opinion or just kind of be a yes man or whatever. Like I want someone who's going to challenge me and offer ideas because that's how stuff gets better. And I think in those cases, it's kind of just then having a good collaborative relationship where you can, I think that the key is kind of like you want there to always be that element of mutual respect, and you want to be able to push back against each other respectfully in the moment, which like occasionally gets a little stressful when you're in the stress of a shoot, but you want to be able to have someone suggest something, and then at the end of the day, if you're directing something, then you also need to have a good sense of this idea, this suggestion, is it fitting into the larger tone, the larger, goal of this project? Because sometimes someone will have a rad idea and you might even for a minute fall in love with that idea, but then you have to gut check yourself and think about, well, is this going to make any sense for what we're doing? And if it's not, then it's kind of, again, kind of in a like respectful way saying, oh, that's rad, man, I love that idea, that's super cool, I don't think that's really, I don't think that's really the one for here. And then I think it's, hopefully you're surrounded with people who get that dynamic. I think like the best collaborators are people who are like, great, yep, just throwing out ideas, like, because I will find, because the other thing is like, I want to be in a situation on set where I can be a little open and kind of vulnerable, and like, if I genuinely am not sure about something, then I can ask a DP, a producer, and say like, hey, what do you think? Like we go with like A or B, what's everyone's gut on this? Which is, the trick is, I think as a director, as a filmmaker, you need to have opinions on things. You need to have, your vision for things, but I think that doesn't preclude you from getting people's feedback and saying like, what do we think of that chair? Do we like that chair? Like, and then sometimes you already knew your answer, because if people were like, yeah, we like that chair, and you're like, yeah, I hate that chair, like then you'll see how you react to it. But sometimes it's just genuinely, I'm not totally sure. Sometimes people are like, well, what if we did this? And I'm like, oh yeah, I love that, let's do that. So I think it's being open in that way. Film is a collaborative medium, and I think you're missing out if you're precluding yourself from that, right?
For sure. And that, is um I think a great like underpinning philosophy of the way the team really should pass the ball and the information and communication back and have that receptivity that you're talking about. And then there's sort of the next sort of granular level where you have to communicate adjustments to your cast and to your crew. And oftentimes, typically, you know, a lot of it can fall if we've got a great assistant director and he can kind of, yell the sort of authoritative voice of like, what the director really wants and let everybody does it. But a lot of times we have to talk to the DP one on one, and we've got to talk to our actors one on one. And that light is creating a shadow, and the DP who is like, he's got a great portfolio. This DP is like hardcore serious DP. He knows his shit, right? But he's got the camera at an angle that's not proportionate to what you as a director feel the scene should, be. How do you communicate that to a person of that
Yeah.
gravitas?
Yeah, I think, again, I think it's in that spirit of collaboration, which, I think I usually bring those things in a way that is, it's almost like engaging in a conversation or a question rather than, I think, trying to be too demonstrative about it or trying to be like, oh, hey, I hate that thing. It's, I think it's much more about, hey, do we feel like we're a little bit too away from the eye line here? Like, could we get, and that type of thing. I think it's, there's a great phrase that people use on set when you're talking about, moving something. Instead of saying that needs to move, people say that wants to move. And it's that sort of like, almost like it just has a different tone to it, right? And I think, for like a DP, I think it's a much more sort of like engaging in that conversation, engaging in that like collaborative uh environment. For things like actors, yeah, it's with actors it's tricky because you're sort of, you can be managing egos sometimes, and ultimately I think actors do want direction to things, right? They want to be, have some guidance and some
Yeah,
shape to it. And I think, for that type of thing, I think it's kind of like, again, offering sort of like, giving people like a playground of like where else this could go, or talking about it in a way of like, hey, that was this, like, can we try it? What if we tried it a little more in this direction? I think, and sometimes that does come down to, I've had situations where actors are like, just tell me more specifically like what it is, which I'm happy to do in that case too. And it's obviously like, you're always kind of finding it, you're funneling it in, and a lot of it comes down to how much time you have to, where if you have a ton of time to kind of find it together, that's great. There's other times where you're racing the clock, you got to get the shot done, and it becomes much more of a, it has that kind of much more brusque kind of staccato rhythm to it, where it's like, okay, no, let's do it this way, let's move over here, let's get it done quickly, which I think, again, is the surrounding yourself with people who are kind of able to function in those. I love to work with people who are very even keel and calm under pressure, because it's gonna get stressful. The nature of film is it's gonna be stressful. So you don't want people, I don't want people who are gonna add to that stress, right? Unnecessarily.
for sure. Do you have you found some tools when you're working with your actors in terms of, and I know you just mentioned there's different, types of actors and different sorts of projects where, sometimes, yeah, just, smile and give them a wink and you're good as far as the
Right.
direction. And then other times it's really more, okay, you need a performance here. And to elicit a performance, you've done your work with the actor as much as you could have in pre-production, established, kind of a rapport. Do you find a tool set that you continually go back to work with actors on their performance?
Yeah, I read this book. I think I want to say it's by this director named William Ball, who was a Broadway theater director, and it was one of the best books I've read on directing. Now it's a little bit, the way he speaks about the process is sort of refers to like the theatrical rehearsal process where you actually have time. But, I took a lot from that, because one of the things he talks about is initially when you're first kind of getting into a scene and breaking a scene, like really creating a space where actors feel like they can play, like not initially negating things, because he talks about this idea of bad ideas and things that feel weird, they'll fall away naturally, right? Because if an actor like makes a choice and it feels weird, then they're probably not going to do it again. And so that helps you create the space where people feel able to create and able to play. And then from there, once you've kind of, established that, then there's that trust built that you're a person who's creating an environment where people can be experimental and, and take risks. I think that's the thing, is the last thing you want to do is get an actor in their head, because you want that spontaneity, right? And this it's such a cliche, but it really, so much of it does come down to casting. Like, you just want an actor who is a performer, who you know is bringing the energy that you want, and is a person who, you know, is a level, ideally is a level of performer who, you know, is able to kind of deliver what you want. And then within that, yeah, then it's just sort of a, you know, like much more sort of like micro adjustments. You know, I tend to rely a lot on you know, sort of metaphors and taking things out of the specific context of the scene. So, you know, if I'm trying to get someone in a certain way, you know, I might use an analogy that's completely unrelated to kind of like get them out of their head about the scene, you know. So I might say like, let's try this one as if like, you know, that feeling when you show up at the restaurant and the line is out the door, or what, you know. So it's like something that's like completely outside of the emotion of the specific scene, but imbues it with something that's like very relatable. I tend to rely on that a lot because I think that helps. It just brings some different energy to the thing that gets us out of, because I think the danger is it's easy to get stuck in the rut of a scene, right? And it's hard to break out of that sometimes. So anything you can do to kind of change that energy up.
Yeah, I think that's a great thing to remind all of us of, is the use of analogy and metaphor and bringing in things that are outside of the current context to be able to see the context with a fresh set of eyes and fresh perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. Really like that. In terms of post, you know, we've gone through the ride, we've arrived at post, we have a ton of footage. Um, do you have your script notes well documented? Are you going into it more blind? Do you give the editor their first take at it? Are you there throughout? How do you do it?
I try to, if I can, I try to write the editor some notes from set, which is, it's less of a, sometimes it's a specific plan, but mostly it's kind of just like a rundown of, here's how the day went, here's the things that felt super cool, here's some, you know, things that I think you're going to run into. So I like to do that. And then, you know, I think one thing that's so important to remember, and it's like, you know, I feel like you forget it every time, is that most of the time the first cut of something is gonna be a nightmare, right? Like, you're gonna watch a cut and be like, oh my God, what have we done? We failed. Like, you know, not always, but a lot of the time you're just like, oh my God. And so I think it's, you know, being able to sit with that and accept that and remember that you'll find your way back. I think, you know, sometimes you get super close on the first pass, which is great. But yeah, I think then it's kind of like similar to that idea of, you know, preparation and prep and then going to the shoot. I think it's also that thing of being totally willing, and this is a bit of a cliche, but also super important and very hard to do sometimes, is just being willing to kind of throw out the plan again in post and use the actual footage that you have to create something that maybe, you know, was not exactly what we envisioned before, but given the footage we have, you know, this is the best way to bring this to life. And that gets to, you know, being willing to kill darlings and, you know, and lose that shot that you're in love with because it's such a pretty shot, but it's like it just doesn't do anything for us here. That, you know, that's usually the biggest problem, is like, oh, but that shot was so cool, or like that shot took us 4 hours, and it's like it doesn't matter. Like, it's a different, you know, I think similar to like the way it's super helpful when you're revising scripts to kind of give yourself enough time in between it so it no longer feels like your own and you can be, you know, not precious about it. I think the same is true in post, of just being really willing to, you know, to try things and see where you can take a project and what's the best, version of it. And, and I think to that end, being open to ideas that editors have and kind of, and I frequently I think I'm like very intuitive when it comes to that process. Like I kind of just will frequently have gut feelings of what if we took that shot and moved it here? And sometimes you're completely wrong and it's terrible, but sometimes your instinct is correct and you like the way that something shakes out.
Yeah. I love that reminder as well as like when you get into that post phase, it's like a brand new thing, and to see it with those fresh eyes again, and then seeing that, okay, it's maybe different than what you had expected, but the problems that you're overcoming can make the thing even better than you anticipated, and that's just such a fun part of that piece of it because it's really like solving a little puzzle, you know.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Matt, thank you so much for being on the show. Thank you for sharing
Absolutely.
your experience and wisdom. And I know that it's been hard won. It's not easy to have that under your belt. So it's great that you are where you are. Congratulations for that, man.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. Yeah, super fun. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. All right, man. I'll catch you next time. And stay tuned, everybody. Thank you. Bye.